I am really excited to be here with you all this morning. I'm going to do a brief little intro. My name is Sharde O'Rourke. I've been a therapist for about 15 years. I am a licensed professional counselor, a marriage and family therapist, licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed substance abuse treatment practitioner, a clinical trauma professional, a psychological autopsy investigator, and a substance abuse professional. So in this space of working with the LGBTQ population, I have done for almost 10 years. And I was really passionate in the beginning about exploring that space, and it turned into a specialty for me. I really enjoy and am passionate about servicing the LGBTQ community. So that is also one of the specialty areas of my practice. So I own and operate a group private practice here in Virginia, specifically Hampton Roads. We are currently all virtual, but we have been around for almost 6 years come this October. I am a professor at the University of Massachusetts Global. So I teach marriage and family therapy master's level courses. I also have authored 6 books on various topics, specifically the last one being parenting. But I've done everything from couples books to journals to exploratory books on self-exploration. I do a lot of consulting on crisis, especially with being a certified trauma professional. I do a lot of crisis consultation. With that, also supervising residents, which I love. So just seeing the new generation of therapists come into the world and build their skill is really a powerful tool. So I'm excited to be here with you all from my lovely home office with all of my little plant babies. I can't wait to share this experience with you guys. So along with Shanice and the housekeeping, just a few housekeeping rules. One, if you want to speak, please take yourself off of mute. This is not a lecture. That's not what this is built to be. You guys can read the slides. So I'm going to encourage a lot of dialogue. We will have a breakout group a little bit less than halfway through. If you need to take a break, take a break. If you feel safer with raising your hand, that's your jam. I would just ask that you wait till I finish speaking to speak. But I definitely encourage participation, whether it be you speaking or in the chat. That's your prerogative. But I do encourage you to ask questions if you have questions. There's not a time limit on that. I do have time scheduled at the end for questions, but that does not mean you cannot ask it all through the engagement, because I encourage you to. And again, to take care of yourself as you need to. Make sure you have your water. We've got candles lit. We've already got candles lit. We've already.
I said, yes, lit. Yes, lit.
We have candles lit. We did our sage this morning. We're gonna enter this in a positive healing atmosphere, and I can't wait to drop this information. So if you guys are all ready, we're gonna get started.
While Sharde is getting everything together right now, I just want to remind everyone, please continue to look on the Region 5 website and the Western Tidewater website. We have plenty more amazing trainings like the one today coming up. In the future, different topics. Sometimes we offer CEs and things like that. So I just wanted to remind everyone, please feel free after the training. First of all, don't check any emails during your training. Second of all, after the training, I have to go to the Region 5 website in Western Tidewater, WTCSB.org, to get some additional training.
Okay, can you guys see it pretty clearly?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, we are going to go ahead and get started. So the reason why I titled this Open Eyes was specifically because oftentimes we enter into relationships, engagements, interactions with each other with very clear lenses of our own. And sometimes it's clear to us, Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's more clear to others than it is to us. So the idea with this presentation is to support you in having an open eye perspective, as in you can see what you can see. It's almost like the moment you are a baby and you get candy for the first time and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know life could be like this. That is what the idea is once you get more information, it engages you and gives you the opportunity to have a varied perspective from before. So we are going to get into it. And again, this is just treating and working with the LGBTQ community 101. So throughout this entire training, I have a lot of quotes. I love quotes. I think they are such small pieces of information that help us reflect. So I have a lot of these, and specifically with this one, this just speaks about our perspective, experiences, trauma, happiness, our design as human beings, and our higher power. We can only digest what our body is prepared for. Simple as that. So, of course, we have an icebreaker, which I absolutely love. The question is, what is something about you others struggle to accept or honor? And I'll give you some examples. Being wed, being unwed, having children out of wedlock, having children at all, being Black, being white, being Hispanic, having several sexual partners, being in the LGBTQ community, them not agreeing with your choices, boundaries, etc. So whoever would like to introduce themselves, it has the 1, 2, 3 at the bottom for you to say your name, your profession or community role, and then to answer the question.
I don't mind going first.
Go for it.
Okay. So I am Rhiannon Hood. I am a peer support specialist, not yet certified, still working on hours. And the answer to the question is exactly what we were just talking about earlier, is that, I do adult content. And most people can't accept that. They have a problem with that. So that's a them problem, not a me problem.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Good morning, everybody. I am Lottie. I am a registered peer support specialist. I've been doing this for this agency for 8 years. I've been in recovery for 38 years and 9 months, successful recovery by the grace of God and you people. I work for Southside Behavioral Health. And my answer to the question, there are a lot of things people struggle with. One is I do have healthy boundaries. And regardless of who you think you are, they are my boundaries. And also, I'm an advocator. I stand up for people. And some people do have problems with that. But again, I will still stand up for them. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you so much. And congratulations on your recovery time. That is amazing.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carol Gentry. I work at Holistic Therapeutic Services, Mental Health and Behavioral Health. I'm the program manager and all the above. I struggle sometimes. I face with people that are higher up in a role than I am, and they're men. And, men flirt all the time. But the boundaries change. The flirting changes to judgment or try to define me or tell me who I am or what I'm missing. If they know that I'm a lesbian, I've faced that in my job that I'm in. That person is no longer with the company, but that was hard for me because like you don't respect me as who I am and who I represent. Because I have a higher position, I was demeaned, to their definition of who I should be.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we're going to get into more of what that will look like, especially with the clients that we serve. And I'm so glad that you share that, because the idea is, you know, sometimes we disconnect from what we do with the people we serve as if it doesn't apply to us. And it absolutely does, because our lives all look very similarly. And even those power dynamics and struggles and the amount of disrespect that people experience, that you specifically shared with experiencing. People experience that daily. I can't imagine what that's like, being on your job, having that experience. So we definitely are going to get into more of that. Thank you for that.
Stephanie put in the chat, Stephanie Fairbanks, ACT lead clinician, Hanover County. She said taking a long time to get her license. She said she started this journey a long time ago.
Good morning, I'm Stacy Young. I am an administrator with the Region 5 Crisis Call Center Hub. And I think one of the things I struggle with is people tend to have presuppositions about me very quickly and don't tend to seek to understand conversations with me and assume certain things about my personality and my diversity, and act on that without necessarily getting to know me and recognize the different levels of depth that I, bring to the table as well as someone. So that can be a struggle sometimes. And I tend to be a little bit outspoken. Any of you that know me, there's some familiar faces in this, know that I tend to be a little bit boisterous. And so sometimes that can be my greatest gift, but it can also be one of my biggest challenges.
Look at all that awareness. Okay. I love that last line is it sounds like you're really aware about who you are and what you have to offer. And sometimes people don't understand our gift, so they don't know what to do with it. But I'm glad that you're aware that it is a gift and a privilege for them to experience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shamika Brown, work with Portsmouth Behavior Health Care Services as a clinical therapist, in the process of getting my license under Miss Sharde. But to answer the question, I'm a very tall woman. And so some people see the height first, especially in public. Even being confronted by men, they don't see me or acknowledge me as a woman or a person in general. And so my height tends to be the basis of many conversations, to where there are so many different layers to me that I would want people to gain the opportunity to explore. But I embrace my height. I just don't want that to be the immediate focus. And sometimes that's what happens quite often.
We have Katrina Faison, crew, ACT clinician at the Tidewater Cove. Hers is my boundaries and putting myself first.
Good morning. I am Chiquita Merrill. I'm a clinical administrator at Western Tidewater Community Services Board. I also work as a licensed professional counselor in private practice at Suffolk Psychotherapy. I would say something that people struggle to honor about me is what I would say are hidden identities. So I think that a lot of times people kind of come into a space or into a room and they assume that they know things about the way that you look and identify. I have what I would say is a heteronormative presenting relationship. And so I'm often mistaken for straight, and I'm not. And also, like my spiritual journey, I don't identify as Christian, but I do think because of, I think I guess I'm kind of straight-laced. I don't really appear to be very like bohemian or anything like that. I don't think a lot of people recognize that I'm not Christian. And I think that happens in a lot of spaces that we're in. There's a lot of privilege that comes from those kinds of identities, being straight, being Christian. in that we use those kinds of languages in a lot of what we do, in a lot of what like forms and just generalities, the way we assume things about people. And so you don't always want to walk into a room and have to come out every time someone says something to you. And so that can be a little exhausting.
Thank you so much for that. We will be getting into social ownership later on, but I really appreciate you sharing that and the idea around people struggling to accept what they don't consider the norm. And whatever, and we all know that the norm or the idea around normal varies person to person, culturally, spiritually, generationally, norms vary. So it is really challenging to try to navigate around that day to day in the various spaces that we take up. So thank y'all for sharing, and we're going to have some more sharing coming down the line too. I thank you all for those who chose to share, and I hope more of you choose to engage down the line. I'm really excited about the opportunity to explore what this means for the folks that we serve in our community, and specifically for ourselves. I specifically asked this question because so often we get into spaces that we would like to be accepted in, but we acknowledge that we're not. Or we acknowledge that it is exhausting going into these spaces with the knowledge that we're not accepted, but having to function in them anyway. And what that looks like for not only us and how it feels, but how do we think that feels for the people that we're expecting to come into our space and we're supposed to be servicing them, and whether they see us as accepting or not.
Sharde, I'm so sorry to interrupt you real quick. Emily with us, she asked, could she please share?
Of course.
Emily, did you want to share? I see her trying to unmute, I think. I think her camera just went on. Okay, well, maybe when she gets back, I'm not sure what happened. She had put in the chat that she wanted to share, but her camera just. So I guess we'll continue.
Okay, Emily, if you are open to still sharing down the line, please do. Okay, and I briefly already mentioned this, but what this means when we're servicing the LGBTQ community can mean a lot of things. Oh, 1 second, guys.
Yep, she just asked to join us again. She must have got disconnected.
Okay.
Hey, Emily, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. My video and microphone weren't working.
It's okay. I saw you like typing, kind of looked on your phone. I was like, she's trying, but
I
she got
was.
disconnected. All right, go ahead. We were waiting on you.
I just wanted to say my name is Emily Garner. I am recently licensed clinical social worker at at Norfolk Community Services Board with the intake department. And the kind of thing that people struggle to accept, I would say for me, is I grew up in the very conservative Christian household, and I identify as bisexual, and that's one of those sexual orientations that gets very overlooked. Is almost like a myth to a lot of people, like it's not real, especially that I'm with a man, so that gets downplayed a lot. I'm also, I don't know if I want to have children, and that's a big taboo as a woman, a young woman in a relationship with a man. And yeah, it's been a little bit of a struggle, but very much come to terms with it.
Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
I'm glad that you shared that, because we are definitely going to get into, first and foremost, people struggle with something. People struggle with the difference between identities and sexual preference. So even just getting into the mind-blowing, like, oh, so you can like more than one type of person is like an extended conversation.
Mhm.
So I'm glad that you preface that, because you're absolutely correct. The whole idea with identities and sexualities seem to be a new conversation, but if we look historically, it is not at all a new concept in any way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
But for whatever reason, socially, politically, this environment really struggles with ownership of other people, their identities, and their sexuality. So that becomes really about power and control versus acceptance and like acknowledgement, which are two very different things. So
Yes.
I'm glad that you identified that, and I really appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm reading. Thank you so much, Latoya. Because there are definitely cultural variances environmentally where we're from in space, and how that influences even the ideas around gender and sexuality. Also, we're going to get into that also a little bit later. Okay, so we have 5 objectives today. Again, I hope that you get whatever you need out of this dialogue today. My goals for today are to define the general concepts and language around working with the LGBTQ community, to identify considerations and resources in treatment of adults and children, to explore barriers to accessing services and issues impacting the community. Excuse me. And then to explore biases and also identify and educate you all on 3 treatment interventions in practice and active practice. So in active practice, meaning whether you're a caseworker or a case manager or a community support, or you're a mom, or you're a dad, or you're a sister or a friend, all of these can apply to you as well in some way, shape, or form. So if a few of you don't mind sharing, what do you plan on getting out of today?
I can go first. I was really interested in this specific training because of how, I don't want to say toxic, but how negative things are turning out politically right now. And I feel like there's going to be a huge spike in LGBTQ plus members coming in for mental health treatment because of just how awful things are getting. So I want to be prepared to do my part.
Thank you for that. And thank you for acknowledgement of that, because it's getting scary. It's getting to the point where this is one of the things I was going to mention later, but I'm not sure if you all are familiar that Uganda has enacted the death penalty for individuals identifying in the LGBTQ community, and if it is connected to HIV at all. So if you are engaging in same-sex activity, and or if you have HIV or are giving HIV with or without acknowledgement, they are enacting the death penalty in Uganda. This is like just as of recent as maybe a week or 2 ago. But we're gonna talk more about that a little bit later. But it is not just a United States problem, it is a world problem, and it is getting increasingly dangerous for individuals in the LGBTQ community to just exist, just exist. So thank you for sharing that. Would anybody else like to share what they would like to get out of today?
I am also, oh, lost my ear. I also have a struggle because I am not only, like I said, an adult creator, but I'm also polyamorous and sapiosexual. So there's a lot of miscommunications. There's a lot of assumptions, as somebody else said. There's a lot of like people look at you and judge you. And the one thing that I really, really want to get out of today is finding a better way to be able to express that I am a safe space, because I am non-judgmental about anything. And I am also one of the first people that if somebody is having an issue, even if it's in public, I don't care, I speak up, because there is no person that does not deserve respect. And I am very outspoken about that. I'm very outspoken about it on social media. And I've gotten to the point where, what's the phrase? Oh yeah, my give a damn's busted. So, you know, I am very, oh yeah, we're not doing that here.
Yeah.
You know, now we're going to use this as a teaching moment, but we're not doing that here.
So for you, what purpose does this training serve for you?
No learning is ever wasted. As far as I'm concerned, I am one of the ones that, you know, when I was going to college, I was doing the whole, well, I want to learn that, and I want to learn that, and I want to learn that, and I want to learn that. And it's like, well, what do you mean I have to pick? Why can't I just take them all? And that's the thing, learning that and being able to apply that as, you know, a peer support coordinator, because I don't necessarily have the same challenges that someone from another country does, but I have friends that are all over the world, mostly through my social media. But being able to create that safe space, being able to foster healthy spaces is one of the things that I am very adamant about. And, you know, we have a drop-in center here in Norfolk. And that's one of the things that I want to make sure is that that space is as safe and inclusive as possible. I'm not necessarily a part of that group yet, but I'm actually talking to them about doing some volunteer hours there.
That's awesome. I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have one more that would like to share? I know folks are sharing in the chat also. Gain father knowledge and understanding to assist others, gaining more knowledge about others, learning and understanding how to create healthy space, working with diverse populations. Fantastic. Fantastic. All right, we're going to keep it going. We're going to get into definitions. So I'm going to say this first. I know that y'all are just increasingly intelligent, so I don't want to read these verbatim. I'm going to do a little bit of explanation and example.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Are we going to get these slides later? Are you going to send these, or?
The video is going to be, is recorded, so it'll be posted on the website with all of the slides.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. So one of the things that I brought up earlier was the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. They are two different things. Underline, highlight, asterisk. They are two different things. Gender identity refers to how I identify as an individual person. Okay, that refers to me as a person. Sexual orientation refers to who I am attracted to and or decide to be sexually engaged with. Those are two different things. So identity refers to my orientation. So let's say biologically, okay, most of us are born either male or female, okay? This is where I need y'all to follow me. Most of us are born either male or female. As we know, specifically now in the world, there are many identities. So we can identify as non-binary, as in I'm not identifying with one sex or another, or I have many identities, right? You have folks that have pronouns as they or them. So they don't identify with he or she, they identify with they or them, as in I'm not identifying with one specific sex. Okay, that is an identity. Sexual orientation refers to the person I am engaging with or the people I'm choosing to engage with, okay? So there was a term brought up earlier that I have on another slide, bisexual. Bisexual infers that I am not just attracted to one sex. Bisexual, bi meaning two, right? So if you think of it as like, I am the person, I have an identity as a person who I am attracted to, two, one here, I am attracted to men and women, or I'm attracted to trans females, trans males, right? There can be two, there can always be more than one. So the other part to this is, if you are unclear, ask questions. If you are, the best thing about being a human being is our gift to be curious. It is the opportunity to ask questions. If they don't want to answer, as in the individual doesn't want to answer, they don't have to. It is your job to do your own research and exploration. However, going into experiences assuming doesn't get us anywhere. So being very clear that you have the opportunity to be curious is a superpower. You can ask questions. Also, I want to explore the whole idea around trans, right? Transgender refers to someone who is not identifying with their biological sex, and they identify with the opposite sex from their biological sex. I will give you an example. Trans female would be someone who was born biologically male and they identify as a female. So this also would refer to their social, physical changes. Like, so just because someone identifies as, let's go with this example, as a trans female, that doesn't mean they have to get surgery. That doesn't mean they have to have gender affirming care. We're going to get into more of what that means. That doesn't mean that they have to physically identify as a female. That means that they identify as a female. That's it, that's all. Does everyone understand that? Because I think a lot of times I hear, well, how can you identify as trans if I can't tell that you're trans? Well, that's not your business. The person can identify as whatever they want to identify with. Your only job is to respect their choice. That's our job. Respect their choice. Their choice does not impact us in any way, shape, or form. Does anybody have questions about that? Okay, was that simple enough? Okay, I'm trying. I wanted to give more examples, especially about trans. So the other part to this that I want to express, and we're going to get into a little bit of that later too, is gender affirming care. Gender affirming care refers specifically to trans folks, and sometimes they can decide that they want to get surgery to align with how they identify. For example, if I was biologically, I'll use myself as an example. I'm biologically born as a woman, but I decide to transition and identify as a trans man. I could possibly get a penile transplant. I could possibly get my breast removed for the physical appearance of a flat chest as of one that would look preferably male. I could also get testosterone. There are things that I can do to help encourage me to physically appear as the gender I want to align with. that does not mean that is something that is required. It is absolutely not required. Gender affirming care sometimes can be paid for by insurance, like especially with like Medicaid and some commercial plans. They have come around to financially supporting gender affirming care, but there are still a lot of spaces where gender affirming care is not supported financially. And there are not a lot of providers that provide gender affirming care. And that also goes along with therapy. Every therapist is not an ally. Every therapist is not LGBTQ educated. So even supporting these individuals with having folks that support them and their choices is really important. Having providers that align with what they're looking for is really important. So on this slide, I specifically want to focus on gender dysphoria. What that specifically refers to is someone who struggles with their physical appearance not aligning with their internal identification. What does that mean? My name is Sharde. Let's say that I am biologically a female. I want to and identify as a trans man, right? I identify as male. However, I look like this. I am struggling with the fact that I have breasts. I'm struggling with the fact that I have a vagina. I'm struggling with the fact that I still have a menstrual period, versus being able to have some of the physical caricatures or identifiers as a male. That in itself is creating anxiety and stress for me. That is generally what gender dysphoria means. It is creating distress based on what I'm experiencing with my biological attachments. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Please, again, if you have questions, we're not waiting to the end. You go ahead and ask in the chat, or let's just go forward if you have questions. I'm trying to keep up with time, y'all. Oops. Wait a second. Oh, wait. Skip some. Okay. All right.
I have a question.
Of course.
In regards to gender affirming care, would birth control not be considered gender affirming care?
Yes, it can be. This is the thing I will say though. Birth control is tricky because it provides extra estrogen. So for someone who, I'll give you an example. For someone who is trying to transition to trans male, and let's say that they decide they want to take testosterone, that's almost going to be working in exact opposite or challenge for them. So instead of taking birth control, ideally they would want to look at some more options, like maybe the Depo-Provera shot or something like that. So technically it can be gender affirming, but in the bigger scheme of things, it may not be at all, depending on what they have going on or what their desired outcome is.
Okay.
That was a great question. Thank you. Thank you. Do you all have any questions about non-binary or queer? I talked about this a little bit earlier, so I didn't want to be repetitive. What? Okay. I love this quote because I believe fear has not only fueled hate, fear has fueled insecurity, fear has fueled disconnection, fear has fueled misunderstanding, fear has fueled and encouraged people to resist who they are, fear has discouraged freedom. Fear can also serve as a change maker. Fear can encourage you to conquer your wildest dreams. But I find socially it has created or limited freedom for so many folks, especially in this community. Fear around actual realities, being harmed, being hurt, political changes that are influencing their ability to function and live freely just in day-to-day life is really important to acknowledge.
Okay, so just pretend my hoodie's a gown. Okay. And open your eyes. What do you think? I had it made to look like yours. I can see that. I have loved this picture since I was a little girl, and I just wanted to surprise you. Do you like it? Okay, what, Mom? What don't you like? Nothing. It's lovely. What else would you like me to say? Oh, I don't know. Something. I mean, I've been bending over backwards since you first got here just to make you feel comfortable. I didn't ask you to do anything for me. I'm getting married in a church for you. Don't you dare imply that there's anything about a wedding to a woman or a baby out of wedlock that's for me. Wow. Okay. So what bothers you more, my bastard child or my lesbian fiance? You're a lawyer, Mom. You're out in the world. You know other gay people. Your secretary's gay. I'm your daughter. Do you know how devastating it is to raise a child, to love a child? I know you won't see that child in heaven. We're not a bride. And I am not the mother of the bride. And this isn't your wedding. It isn't right. I'm sorry. I can't be here. I just can't.
Now, I'm not sure how many of you are fans of Grey's Anatomy, but that is my jam. So I really love, first of all, the series, but I love that specific clip for so many reasons. There were so many nuances and undercurrent conversations happening in that one very brief dialogue. So I wanted to prompt you with that example to ask this question. What are some biases and assumptions you have in working or interacting with the LGBTQ community?
I don't know how steady my internet is going to be for everyone to hear me, but we have been receiving clients from the CHKD. There are several children that are coming through with identity other than what they were born with. And the parents, it is so hard to get the parents to understand what their child is going through. So it's that same situation, you know, not my child. That's not how I raised my child. Like it was all them, you know. I was in a similar situation when me and my wife got married. It was the same thing. My mom didn't come. She wanted no part of it. She doesn't ask about her. She doesn't ask anything about it. And she throws church in all the time, you know? So I remember that episode and live it through work and in my personal life.
Thank you so much, Carol, for sharing that. One of the things that I will typically work with clients on is accepting their family's grief. That is grief. I am losing the person that I birthed, that I brought into the world. And now this new person has come along and I don't know who this person is. And I'm scared to know who this person is, especially if this could, in their mind or from their perspective, completely contradicts who I am and what I believe. that's a scary place to be. So even in working with folks on accepting that that is their family's reality and giving people time and space to grieve, but that does not mean you have to accept disrespect. And this clip is I'm so glad you shared that. This is not out of the norm, you guys. These kinds of conversations are not out of the norm. Anyone else want to answer the question? Please go for it.
I was going to say an assumption I have typically when working with people from the LGBTQ plus community is, and that clip shows it, is that lack of family support or an extended family of support, whether that's a church community or even just non-religious support groups. And the church thing is a big part of it. Like I said, I came from a very conservative military family. When I told my parents that, hey, there's a chance I might end up with a man or a woman, my parents cried and said, what will the church think? And my parents are wonderful people, but that was their reaction. So that clip hits kind of close to home.
So specifically in your example, the other thing that happens is people make it about them.
Yes.
How does your identity, your sexuality, how that impacts me in my world? That can sometimes be fear-based, but sometimes it's just about, what are humans? We're selfish. We're selfish. How does what you're gonna do reflect on me? And then it may be even less about what your choice is, more than it is about what other people are going to think about your choice and say to me and how they're going to treat me, not how I'm treating you, the person I love. Absolutely. And y'all, just keep in mind, these are the things that people are saying to you guys out loud. Imagine the things that people don't say. Everyone from the pastors to the case managers, to the directors, to the police officers, to the judges, to the parents, to the community partners, to the moms and the dads. And like, imagine the things people don't say and how that is reflective on how they treat people. It's not even always, the one thing I say is I'm not afraid of someone who's willing to say to my face they don't like me. What I'm afraid of is all the people that really don't like me and they never say it and they smile and they grin and they create chaos for you behind closed doors. That is very dangerous. Anyone else? Can we get one more person that wants to answer the question? What are your biases? Because we all have them, you guys. Whether it be our perspectives on marriage, whether it be our perspectives on sexuality or gender identity, we all have them. I will give you an example myself. So one of the courses that I teach, is on couples. And one of the conversations we had 2 weeks ago was about pronouns. That is always a very slippery slope conversation in this day and age. So I very clearly identify that I am a heterosexual cisgender female. I am a woman. I identify as a woman. I am heterosexual. So I come from that perspective. And I do not ever appear as if I am giving my perspective from being in the LGBTQ community. So I like to make that very clear. So one of the conversations we were having were about pronouns. And I was educating my students on pronouns and what that means. And one of my students is trans. And so they said, well, why is it that we have to talk about pronouns? Why can't you just say, you don't ask a cisgender person what their pronoun is? And I said, that's a very slippery slope. Specifically from my experience, and just being in the world, the moment you accidentally or intentionally misgender someone, it becomes a thing. And so I think it is a setup is setting people up for failure. So my bias is I am not going to put myself in a predicament to disrespect someone when that's not my intention, but I am biased in that this is a slippery slope. I can set myself up for failure before I even start. And I understand that. So I try to be very careful about how I engage. But that was an open dialogue around pronouns. Anybody else want to share? I can't see everyone. So if you just want to talk, go ahead and talk. I only see a slither of folks on my screen. All right, we're going to keep going. Okay, so considerations. This is where I wanted to talk about the whole experience that's happening now in Uganda, but y'all, we've been hearing about Florida. Although Florida is the primary state in the news, it is not the only one. Okay, Minnesota just enacted a law against providing minors with gender affirming care, and it's not the only state. Again, socially and with the news that we get, it's not an all-inclusive. There's so many things happening around the world, but there are focuses that the news chooses to focus on. But that's not the only state. There's many states enacting legislation against the LGBT community. Virginia being one of those places, which I'm sure some of you have heard about the conversations around bathrooms. That has been a conversation for years around bathrooms. And if it's appropriate, and if they're bringing into legislation, which they did recently, around individuals that identify as transgender using gender affirming bathrooms, and that being a whole conversation. Transgender students getting access to locker rooms and facilities with the sex they identify with versus their biological sex. Those are open conversation, and legislation is being created to limit experience and opportunity. So when we talk about dysphoria, imagine being a trans female having to go to a male bathroom. Imagine being a cisgendered woman going into a male bathroom, having to use a male bathroom. First of all, they look different, they feel different. Let's just start with the basis, right? The basics. They look different, they feel different, but there is an energy that's different, and our parts aren't the same. I don't identify with this. Let's do something different. I don't identify with having to have the experience that a male has. So how that creates angst for folks, and it becomes very dangerous. So the one thing I encourage is look for spaces where there are family restrooms. Airports have family restrooms. Use a family restroom. Try to put yourself in spaces that you feel safe. If you feel unsafe in that space, look for a space that you feel safe. The one thing you can change is space. You don't have to change yourself. There are spaces. And I see the unpopular opinion, non-gender bathrooms. There, and again, I guess in my mind, that's similar to family bathrooms. Everyone is welcome in a family bathroom. It's for everyone. Just keeping those things in mind, you guys, when we are working with individuals from the LGBT community, these are things that are privileges to us that we take for granted. These are privileges we don't even think about. We just go use the bathroom. We don't think about how that impacts someone else. So honoring pronouns. Has anybody by a show, and again, I only see a slither of people. I'm trying to see more of y'all. Is there any of you that have struggled with pronouns? I see some shaking of heads. No, yes, no, maybe so. Does everyone understand how to use pronouns? I see some yeses. Okay. We're going to keep this real simple. Okay. If you guys see, yes and no, I don't know how to use pronouns. Thank you for sharing, because I didn't even see you. Thank you for that. We're going to keep this very simple. If you notice, there are some people with pronouns next to their name on their screens. Does everyone see that? That some folks have pronouns. Okay. That is your choice. If you want to identify your pronoun right out the gate, that's your choice. The one thing I like to ask is, what is your preference? What's your preferred identity or pronoun or name?
That's a big one for me, honestly, because
Okay.
I don't use my first name, I use my middle name.
Okay.
So walking into a situation or walking into a work situation where they insist on calling me by my first name, I get really irritated because that's not the name I choose to use.
Yes.
Whereas I don't necessarily have to worry about pronouns so much. I do have a tendency when I meet somebody, I will ask them, what's your preferred pronoun? What's your preferred name?
Mm-hmm.
And I usually go by what they introduce themselves as,
Yeah.
but you know, unless otherwise stated, but I will ask them, what's your preferred pronoun?
Absolutely. That's the easiest way to go, y'all. Just ask the question. Don't assume. Don't assume that you know. And I love that you used the name reference, especially as it relates to dead names or biological names that people do not use any longer. Keep in mind, if you are in the healthcare professional, which I'm hearing that a lot of you guys are, their insurance card may say their biological name because it is not legally changed yet. But that does not mean they want to use that name. And if you work in the healthcare field, it may also be on their chart for billing purposes. Just because that name is in the chart doesn't mean that's the name they want to use. But for all of those who know, like you know, the name has to be appropriately referenced in the chart in order for billing to align it and it be billed correctly. So please, please, please just ask, how would you like to be referred? What are your pronouns that you like to go by? You prefer to go by? It's simple as that. And if you're unclear, use their name. I don't care if you say my name 1,700 times. You don't need to say he or she or they. You could say Sharde every time. Sharde, how are you? Sharde, I'm cool with that. It's my name. If you're unclear, use their name, but always reference, you can ask the question. Do y'all have any questions about that? Because it can get really tricky. And I will tell y'all, the ones that trip me up in using it in sentence is they, them. Every time I'm in a sentence, I make a fool of myself. Every single time. And it's not even because I know and I know how to use it. It is that they and them usually refers to more than one person. So when you're using it and you're trying to use it in a sentence, specifically referencing one individual person, it for me trips me up very often. So I just apologize and move on. Hey, I'm telling you right now, I'm about to use they, them, but I this is the one that gets me all stumbled up and looking like a fool. So I'm just prefacing that with, go ahead and laugh. We're going to have a good time together today. And let it go. Be honest, be upfront, be transparent. Be respectful. People are aware. They're not stupid. They understand there are some challenges. So give them the credit they deserve and just being honest. But pronouns are about curiosity and respect. It's not about always getting it right. Ask the question. So I actually want to briefly mention, there was an article, not an article. Do any of you listen to the Breakfast Club? The radio station, the Breakfast Club. And they gave Demi Lovato Donkey of the Day. I want to say it was yesterday, because she said she changed her pronouns again because she was tired and exhausted of like explaining it to people. And so they gave her Donkey of the Day, saying that if you're confused, how confused do you think we are? And I thought that it was a very interesting conversation because I see both sides of the coin. On one side of things, from Demi Lovato's perspective, I'm tired of like going back and forth about what my pronouns are. It's just easier to make it easy for everyone else. Let's just make it easy for everyone else, versus continuing to have these conversations. So I get on one hand why they decided, you know what, let's just be done with it. Let's just use, I think she changed it back to she, her, if I'm not mistaken. So Charlemagne, the guy's conversation or perspective was, well, so every time you decide to change it, am I supposed to go along with that? Am I supposed to just follow along with that? This is what I will say. People have the right to identify any way they want to identify. Just like we have a name, we can change our name anytime we decide. Is it different? If today I don't want to go by Sharde and I want to go by Queen of Zamunda tomorrow, how does that bother you? Just call me Queen for short. Like, that shouldn't be a problem for you, unless you just don't want to call me or use my name or interact with me. That's your choice too. You don't have to interact with me. So that's the other part of this, you guys. We don't have to interact with people, but we choose to. So why not choose to be honoring and respectful of what they need?
My biggest problem with that, and I have literally looked at people and said, if they choose to be addressed or use pronouns they, them, how does that hurt you? Whereas if you choose to misgender them, that hurts them.
You know, I want to make a comment, and I do appreciate you giving the definition on the she, her, he, him, they, and them. I was thinking, and this may sound crazy, but when Zoom started, that's when like within the last year and a half, so we went in the pandemic and everything started to be on Zoom.
Yeah.
And then I started to see people change and they would put the they, them, the she, and the her. And I kept saying, when I would see it pop up, I kept saying, well, why they got to put she and her? We can see, you know, the individual. I see them. I don't quite understand why. And then recently we, an employee that was under me for guidance came in and she made a statement that when she meets clients, she has to ask them who or what do they identify as. And I'm like, why would you do that? You know, you're providing a service to a client. Why does it matter if they are identifying this or the other? If you see them, they give you a name, that should be enough. And she was like, no, Miss Sandra, you can't do that. I was like, why? Explain to me, you know, educate me on it. I said, I've seen the he, she, her, they, and them. I'm thinking it's something in reference to Zoom. I said, maybe it's the Zoom individuals that are aware of why they have to be titled on Zoom. But if I see you in person, you tell me your name is this, that, and the third, I'm going to call you and reference you this and that name that you give me.
Yeah.
So we was going back and forth and she was like, oh no, when you first meet someone now, you have to ask them. And I'm still stuck like, okay, if that's your preference for you to ask them, I said, but at the same time, you don't want to offend anyone by asking them that, because they may come out and say it, and then they may not come out and say it. But if you ask them, you could offend them. And that's what I was telling her. And she was like, oh no, that's the policy. You have to ask everybody these days. I said, oh, okay, if that's your preference. I said, but be mindful if you ask the wrong individual and you offend them, you got to be able to explain why and take responsibility that you said something to someone and you offended them, even though you felt like it was the right thing to do. So
yeah.
Can I comment on that just a little really quick?
Yes, I can't see you, but yes.
So what I want to say, one of the reasons why I put my pronouns on my Zoom is because there's two reasons. One is I want to recognize that pronoun usage is not always about what you see. Yeah. It's about how someone identifies. So when it comes down to it, yes, I think that most people can look at me and ascertain that I express myself as feminine and probably could use she, her pronouns. Mm-hmm. But that's not always the case. Not everybody who presents as feminine uses she, her pronouns. So I'll give you the example. There's a very popular actor named Alex Newell. Alex Newell is gender nonconforming. He uses he, him pronouns. However, if you were to look at him and see a picture of him, you would see him dressed in wigs and dresses and heels and makeup and all of that, right? So, but Alex's pronouns are still he, him. And in that space, so then asking Alex, what are your pronouns? Because you see a feminine expressive person gives him the opportunity to then say, these are my pronouns. My pronouns are actually he, him.
Yes.
And I also put it on I also put she, her on my Zoom, because I also want to kind of identify myself as a safe space for people to know that I care about your pronouns.
Mhm.
So in the same way that I have mine listed, if I ask you what your pronouns are, then that gives you the opportunity. One, you see that this is something that I care about right here. As soon as you walk in, you see me on Zoom, and you see that I have those pronouns listed. That gives you the opportunity to know that this is somebody who's going to care, who's going to honor that I have specific pronouns. But also, if you see me in person, I do the exact same. What I have found that even in my private practice, when I meet a new person, I still always say, these are my pronouns. Can you tell me what yours are? And I do that because even if it's a person that my eyes tell me this person is probably cisgendered, this person probably uses these pronouns, if they get offended by that, me asking, it always helps me to say, this is something that I do to honor everybody's preferences and to bring all identities into the room. I let them know that for me, it's important as a mental health professional to honor everyone's identities of all kinds, including gender identity. And that usually we just move on. Like, if that's what it is, that's what it is. And there's not really a whole lot of conjecture about that. Now, if it's someone who does have like a real strong opinion about it, typically they're not coming back, and that's okay.
Thank you for that. And I will say too, it opens dialogue. It is safer to ask everyone than assume. And you definitely put the nail on the head in gender expression doesn't necessarily look like what we think it looks like. So someone can be feminine presenting or masculine presenting. It doesn't mean that their identity aligns with that. So it is really important to ask. And like, again, always circling back to, this is how I approach everyone. I don't assume I understand or I am clear about everyone's identity. So I just go with the safest option or the option that is most inclusive. And I ask, what are your preferred pronouns? What is your preferred name? Especially if you want to be inclusive. And again, I'll have a lot of times, more often than not, if people don't know what I'm talking about, well, what do you mean? I mean, what do you mean? I'm female? Is that what you're asking? Like, I'll have often where people are asking me, is that what you mean? Is that what you're asking? So sometimes they don't even understand what you're asking, but that's also a space for education to say, oh, okay, well, because I am an inclusive space and I am an affirming space with the LGBTQ community, I include all identities and sexualities in the space. And I like to be inclusive of how people identify themselves. And usually people are just, their mind is blown like, oh, that's a thing. Okay. We would assume that this is so well understood by folks, and it is not, you guys. It is not. I am answering that question more often than people are telling me their identities. What do you mean? Well, what do you mean? What do you mean, like preferred name? Like, I'm like a nickname? People ask those kinds of questions more often than not, you guys. But when you come across folks who want to be honored in that way, the other questions I get are thank you. I can't believe that y'all even asked me that. Most times people don't even ask me. People don't even give me the opportunity to say anything else. I have to just go along with either what they've already seen, i.e. my insurance card or something. I have to go along with that, or I'm sitting here explaining it to somebody for 15 minutes and I just don't even want to do that. So I just say whatever. And that's not what we want. That's not what we want. Go ahead, Emily. And then I know there's one more hand up.
I was just going to say, kind of piggybacking off of what's been said, when I'm doing an intake assessment, we have to collect like basic demographics. And part of that is asking for sexual orientation. And when I ask that question, more times than not, most people ask like, what do you mean I'm male or I'm female? And I'm just like, well, that's not what it means. Here's what it means. And people are offended just by the question. And it blows my mind because it's like, what? How can anyone assume anything about anybody just by being a white male? That doesn't mean you're automatically straight. And it just blows my mind. So I just wanted to piggyback off of that.
Well, I thank you. That goes back to privilege.
Yeah.
Privilege. The privilege is the things we don't even have to think about. We don't think about those questions. So when you ask it, we're like, what? Oh, why are you asking? I don't understand what you're asking me. Privilege. Something, again, I just get to go to the bathroom, identify for females. I don't think about it. I don't talk about it with anyone. I just do it. But I think this is one of those things where people are having to have conversations they usually don't have. It's not even a thing for a lot of people. So thank you for offering that. Someone else has their hand up. Oh, okay, I see. Go ahead.
Yep, that would be me. A couple of things. Number one, I am actually listed on the Kink Aware professionals list because I'm also a professional coach. But in the world of leather, which is very common in the LGBTQIA world, in the leather, like if you go to clubs and things like that, there are levels of training. And when you attain master status, most masters, even if they identify as female, use the master title. They will not necessarily use mistress versus master. I choose to use mistress in mine, but very often there is no gender differentiation in that world. Of someone who is female presenting can just as easily be male identifying or using the male title, pronoun, whatever, as a method in order to be able to take their control.
Yeah.
So it's a very nuanced area, and anyone who is interested in a more in-depth look into that, I am more than happy to have a discussion with it about it, whatever.
Thank you for that. Thank y'all.
Saying on that, I'm going to have to jump off camera for a minute. I'll be back. I'll be right back.
Okay. Thank y'all. Okay, so we're jumping right into relationship structures. I'm not going to read this for y'all. One of the most common that I see and work with nowadays is polyamorous couples. Polyamory, we're going to make it very, very simple. You have an agreeing couple, okay? A couple, as in two folks. They decide how they want to introduce other people. So you could have a triad, as in the couple introduce one other person. Now it's three. I want to align it. All right. Triad. Let's say you have the couple, they each seek their own partners. Now there's four, but these partners do not interact together. Only the primary couple do. Okay. That's four. You could also have it where these couples share partners. They each share together. You can have spaces where one partner has multiple partners, right? They have agreeances and what I can call contracts around relationship structure and what they agree to do. Again, this is not a new concept. The names are what's new. This is not new, you guys. People do these things all the time. A lot of times it's called cheating because there's not agreeances to it, okay? So let's not think too hard about this. People engage in multiple relationships all the time. So let's not overthink it. Polyamory just means it includes other people, and how that is included is up to the couple. There are agreeances and structures and boundaries in place in order to keep the couple, in order to keep what they agreed to. Simple as that. There are relationships where it's sexually open and emotionally closed, meaning you can go have sex with folks, but you cannot get emotionally attached, i.e. no long-term relationships, things like that. They have agreeances as to whether their children are involved or not. They have agreeances around time, invested time, who gets to do what, when, where, and why. I've worked with some couples on just being able to create healthy balances in time frames if you're introducing other people. Polyamory is not a solve or resolution to the primary couple's conflict. I am going to tell you that now. If you have a couple that say, well, you know what, it'll just be easier if we just introduce other people. It does not work that way. You are going to introduce other people into your chaos and your drama. That's enough. So the couple need to be healthy in order to have other healthy relationships. But this is not uncommon, you guys. So the other I will talk about is the niche communities. So she just mentioned kink. Kink is also a part of the community, right? And it's not just in the LGBTQ community. It absolutely exists with heterosexual folks also, right? And people who are cisgendered, but it is specifically talked about more often in the LGBTQ community. So kinks and niches like that are also present. And if you're open to process with folks, you would get a lot of information. It's not that this is not happening with people or they're not interested or into any of these things. Whether or not you are open is the question.
For a moment, I think I mentioned earlier also that I'm also polyamorous.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 partners that live with me, and we have a 3rd roommate that also lives with us, and my mother, which is interesting at times.
Thank you for sharing that. So discrimination, you guys, there was a moment a few years ago, I was working with a trans client and they said to me, why is it different when I walk into the store with, and this was a Black trans person, why is it different when I walk into the store with my white trans friend and they treat them like they want to be treated, but they treat me like what I'm doing is wrong? My response to that was, being trans is one thing, being Black is another thing. It is not created equal. All folks in the LGBT community are not created equal. Color still matters. Period, full stop. Going into a space and being discriminated against as a person in the LGBTQ community is not out of the norm, period. It is a normal social experience for most LGBTQ people, and even down to the degree in some of you identified experiencing that even being here, like that has been your experience previous till today, and not just by strangers, right? By people in your families, people you love, people who love you. Discrimination still exists. So the other that exists that has to be talked about and is often dismissed or not talked about enough is domestic violence and intimate partner violence in the LGBTQ community. So I just have some stats here for you, but it is nearly half, you guys, nearly half of folks experience domestic violence or intimate partner violence. What I find or found most often is people will give themselves permission to be violent with the same sex before they are with the opposite sex. So you will see higher rates of violence in the community, and it has to be addressed, period. We are also going to talk about the violence committed to individuals in this community simply because they identify as trans or as gay or as lesbian or as bisexual, simply because they identify as that, especially if it is by the eye. So if someone identifies them as gay, lesbian, trans, etc., they are at higher risk for being violated. And again, these nuances are not new. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear, that I made sure to include that in this presentation. So again, another very alarming fact is suicide rates are extremely high, you guys. More than 60% of suicide attempts among LGBTQ people happen in the first 5 years of realizing they are in the community. 60%. When you are working with folks in the LGBTQ community, you would always, of course, if you're a provider, you would already ask the question you ask about or give the information about confidentiality and ask about suicidal and homicidal. Always want to ask about history. Do you have a history of suicidal or homicidal ideation? And what does that look like? Just because it's not current doesn't mean it never was. This is one of the most important facts here. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people 10 to 24 in the LGBTQ community. Second leading cause of death. HIV, the impact of HIV and AIDS. So one of the community organizations that I absolutely love working with is MASS, Minority AIDS Support Services, specifically the location in Hampton. I've worked for years with this organization in supporting not only individuals with HIV and AIDS, but individuals in the LGBTQ community struggling with HIV and AIDS. 34 million people are documented to be living with AIDS. 55% of people living with AIDS reside in the United States, 55%. People at higher rates, 1 in 6 of gay and bisexual men will be diagnosed with HIV in their lifetime. For Latino and Black men, excuse me, who have sex with men, their rates are 1 in 4. The other undercurrent that is happening is that it is very high rates for Black women. Black women. They are 14 times as much at risk if they identify as trans, specifically as a trans woman. I cannot tell you guys how many times I've worked with folks that have trauma bonded around HIV and AIDS. The person giving it to the other and now them staying together as a result of. I can't tell you how many times. It is not uncommon. It is absolutely common for people to be dealing with this issue, but it not be discussed or talked about at all. even in their relationships.
Can I say something on that?
Of course. Yes.
It's a topic that's a passion of mine. I did hospice work in the early 90s in the state of Vermont with folks dying from HIV and AIDS because normal hospice care workers back then wouldn't even go in and work with individuals. And the stigma, and the only way I can sometimes describe it is for generations who didn't live back then and experience that is COVID, where people were literally dying and they couldn't go in and hold their loved one's hand and they weren't able to come in, and that community was treated in such a way. And I remember the most impactful thing I could do was go in and hold people's hands in their homes as they were dying from this illness and the stigma from this illness. And it's still a very real thing, even though we've come a long way with our treatment and education and safer talk conversations and, you know, different generations. This is still one area where different ethnic groups and cultures, and particularly, like you mentioned, still get stigmatized and are such barriers to treatment. And it's something we don't ask as clinicians and practitioners often enough around healthcare needs in these particular ways. So it's an honor and privilege, if you've never been with someone who is dying, to be with them on their dying journey. And I will tell you, those experiences probably shaped the rest of my clinical experience back in 1992, 91, and 93, when it was still very much the gay man's disease and things like that reference. So I thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely. For people to be stigmatized as it relates to HIV and AIDS is compounded with the fact that they are just trying to deal with the fact that they have HIV or AIDS. We miss, because we're so involved in ourselves, that this person is dealing with a life-changing diagnosis, like life-changing diagnosis, that they are having to adjust their entire lives to, that they are now even trying to wrap their mind around what that means for the rest of their lives, or how they include or can even participate in relationships as a result of this diagnosis. And on top of that, to be stigmatized by others because, one, you don't understand, or two, you have a judgment on whatever you think that means, creates a whole nother level of stress. And again, goes back to discrimination. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so what I wanted to do really briefly was us break into groups. Let's see, I know we had enough people. So basically, I just want us to have some conversations around these questions. If you can screenshot the question for your group, you can just screenshot the screen so you have the question. Group one is going to discuss how race and culture impact the experience of being in the LGBTQ community. Two, what are the possible outcomes of familial rejection or isolation? And three, how can the education around and biases, openness, experience of the provider impact their experience in treatment? So these are the different topics, and then you're going to identify 5 considerations, 5 possible outcomes for the other 2. So we're going to break you guys into groups for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will come back.
Yes, I am assigning the groups. I was changing all the names to group 1, group 2, group 3.
Okay.
However, it's just, if you're in room 2, you're group 2. If you're in room 1, you're group 1. All right, I'm opening them up now.
Thank you.
And how long are we giving them, Sharde?
We're giving them, let's say 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and process.
Sounds good. I'm opening the rooms.
Okay. Can anyone from group 1 share?
Yeah, I'm just chatting away, being on mute. Sorry. Okay. Now everyone can hear me, yes?
Of course it will be you, Karen, the one that's chatting away with them on mute.
I didn't, my camera was down because I had my list pulled up. Okay, so how does race and culture impact the experience of being in the LGBTQ community? So here's what we came up with. Obviously we touched base on this already, the religious community. There can be a lot of race, shame, fear, and stigma associated with that if you were part of that community. The level of care that providers can have if their value system does not line up with people that they are treating, but that can also impact whether people seek services in the first place. So in the mental health community, if you feel as though you're going to be stigmatized, how much does that impact within that culture, whether you seek services at all? In the culture of the judicial system, there's no real room right now for people who are biologically born one way but present a different way. They don't have trans units, and if for some reason there is some sort of threat of assault or there's a concern, then they end up taking clients who may identify differently and have a very reactive response where they segregate them or they put them just away from all of the population. Generational differences with races and cultures. So obviously older generations and people in the African American community can have the what happens in the home stays in the home kind of culture, resulting in a lot of people just kind of suffering in silence. We just don't talk about it. If you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. The stigma of Black men who identify as gay in that culture and just the need for so much more education and acceptance there. The assumptions in the mental health community and that culture that if you come in for a separate mental health concern, so anxiety or depression, that culture can sometimes assume, well, it's because you identify as LGBTQ, and it could have nothing to do with that. You could be a very stable person who accepts yourself, has a great support system, and also simultaneously has some additional mental health concerns that are not all related. And then coupling with that is there is the culture that assumes that if you identify as LGBTQ, that there's some sort of trauma that resulted from that in your past. So that's quick. That's what we came up with.
Y'all were having some very interesting conversations. I can only imagine all that came out of that. That was fantastic. And I'm so glad that you all, one, were able to identify those considerations. And one that I would specifically want to expound a little bit on is the assumption that because they identify as being in the LGBTQ community, that is why they're here. That's not a thing. We have to treat people like people. It's unfair to consider that because we go to treatment of any kind, that our sexuality or our identity is the reason why we're here, right? We can still have a real issue that has absolutely nothing to do with our identity or our sexuality. And that part of ourselves can be completely healthy. And we can still struggle with depression or anxiety or postpartum or PTSD. All of those things can exist very separately from our identity. So thank you so much for acknowledging that and saying that. Fantastic, fantastic, group one. You did fantastic. Group two, anyone who would like to share what you all came up with, your 5 possible outcomes? Anyone who wants to present on group two? What the possible outcomes?
I can talk a little bit about it. We talked a little bit about how there's potential for increased depression and suicide and isolation, and also just the shifting in the family roles, and maybe, potentially if there was some religion discrepancy, that maybe, family might shun the person or exclude them, maybe not shun, that's kind of a harsh word, but just we talked about the potential of just some of those other impacts and bullying and suicide. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. You're absolutely correct.
Can I add one? I'm sorry, I was in group 2 also.
Yeah.
But someone in our group also shared that maybe the because of them being identifying in a different sexual orientation or whatever, you know, all of the letters, that they might have some self-esteem or some, I think the one person said self-hatred.
Okay, I'm writing you down, you guys, as responses. Absolutely. So when we are working with families, when we are working with individuals, we are working with families, either in person or distantly. We are always, it is always really important to have the family in the room, ideally. What does it look like? What is your role in the family? What are your relationships with your parents, your siblings, your extended family? Where do you see yourself as it relates to your family? How are your identities or your sexual preferences? How are they welcomed or lack thereof? All of those things matter, especially if that is why they're showing up in your office, or that is a discussion that's on the table for them or an issue for them. Being able to be clear about how that impacts them, because it does. Thank you so much for that, group 2. Group 3, anyone from that group who wants to share the 5 possible outcomes?
I don't know if we necessarily got 5 outcomes, but we had a great conversation, I think, just about listening and meeting people where they are at, recognizing our own, maybe sometimes even overzealous types of approaches sometimes. And also we talked a lot about the importance of keeping up with education, and that sometimes our colleagues and peers are not the most receptive either. And the challenges that can come with that. And I had brought up that, you know, sometimes acceptance is not always agreement personally. You can accept someone and where they are in their journey and not necessarily have a personal agreement with it, and how we bring those conversations into spaces and have them in ways where people are ready to hear them. And we just talked a lot about the importance of listening to someone's journey and someone's story. I mean, we all have a story, and being open about that. I don't know anyone else from my group. If I missed something, please jump in or add to it. But that was some of the themes of the conversations we had.
I love that. And I love that you all brought up the difference between acceptance and agreement. Those are 2 very different things. You can absolutely accept someone as they are and disagree with their lifestyle, their choices. I think about it, or I'll parallel it to our children. We can love them to the ends of the earth and accept them as individuals and absolutely disagree with all of their choices. Like, that does not have to be the same thing, because it comes a time when children grow up and we don't have any control over what they choose. But that doesn't mean we don't love them, and that doesn't mean we don't cherish them and care about them, right? And that goes for our parents and our siblings and everyone else. We don't agree with all of their choices. We don't like all of their choices, but we may accept them as people and love them and cherish them and honor them and respect them anyway. We can do both. It's not one or the other. So I'm so glad that you all brought that up in your discussion. And I see a hand up, Dr. Mary Darden. Okay, please go for it.
Yeah, one other thing that we did mention is listening from a perspective of almost being blind, right? Mm-hmm. So I think about that show, I think it's called The Voice, where the chair is completely turned and you have no idea who you're talking to,
Yeah.
what's actually happening. You have their story, but you don't have them until you turn around. And so not only listening, but listening from a place of being as non-judgmental as possible, but listening with your eyes closed.
Yes. Yes. And let's not make it about us. There's two things. There are not a lot of, we're going to specifically talk about the state of Virginia. There are not a lot of spaces for LGBTQ folks to go, to be treated, period, full stop. Whether that's gender affirming care, whether that's therapy, whether that's going to see a doctor, just general family care physician. Like, there are not a lot of spaces that are specifically educated and supported these communities. Like, they need places to go. One of the examples I give often is I get a lot of folks that come to me, and if we just don't fit for whatever reason, or I don't have space, I don't have a whole bunch of folks to send them to. I really just don't. There's not a lot of inclusive care here. So even keeping that in mind when we're trying to give resources to people, there is not very many. So if you are the resource, be mindful of your power, be mindful of your privilege, and use that to support folks in a space that there's not a whole lot of it. And it's not about, I cannot stress that enough, it's not about agreement. You don't have to agree with anything. Really, and to be perfectly frank, what you think doesn't matter. Your feelings about it don't matter. This person is coming to you for treatment and for care. How their choices impact you, they don't. You're there to support them. So if you can keep that as the focus and allow, like you said so beautifully, Dr. Darden Robinson, allow yourself to go into the journey and just be open to it. Be open to the journey. Thank you. Y'all are fantastic. Like, I really appreciate you guys engaging in the dialogue and conversation and being so passionate and forthcoming with your experiences and thoughts and feelings about all of this. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to get into why this information is so relevant. Oops, sorry, I went backwards. My bad. We're going to get into barriers. So this is one of the things, this is not a quote that I use very often, but something I like to say. Courage and bravery in this community is not short or lacking in any way, shape, or form. The amount of courage and bravery that is required in order for you to show up and be yourself is already a thing. But for you showing up and being free to be you, and with the knowledge that there are going to be folks that don't understand, they don't want to understand, that they don't like what they don't understand, they don't like you just because, and being willing to go and maneuver and be socially aware of that and still do it anyway. Like, the courage that this community has still is beyond me. It always is. It's such a privilege to see. So I really love this quote because I just think it's beautiful and it's a force to be reckoned with. So barriers. Some of these barriers you guys have already talked about, and it was kind of brought up in some of the conversations you had in your groups, but we're going to go through some of them. Social barriers, social beliefs about LGBTQ folks, stigmas, morals and values that are competing with the ideals around being in the LGBTQ community. Potential homophobia, you guys. Just because you are a provider does not mean you are not homophobic. They are not exclusive of each other. They can be absolutely inclusive, and that it can be very dangerous. I cannot tell you how many times I have had folks come and sit in front of me and talk about the horror stories of their experiences with therapists who were not accepting at all in any way, shape, or form, and it was harmful. So please be mindful. Just because someone is a provider doesn't mean they are educated around serving that particular population or that they're not homophobic. That's not a given. And then training. There are some trainings that exist, but I don't think there are enough. I don't think that it is it's enough training for people to be able to delve into efficiently and productively supporting this population. So you guys, we talked about this a little earlier. I used the example here of like shelters. Shelters are designated by sex. So this is a barrier, if you, especially around individuals who are homeless and they need or are seeking safety. They have some groups that are absolutely supportive of the LGBTQ community that I've worked with previously, that with clients that are homeless or seeking care or shelter. They do have some LGBTQ friendly spaces, but again, I would say it is very, very limited. Coming out, transitioning, outing, like that whole conversation can be a barrier and a consistent traumatic experience for folks feeling like they have to come out every 5 minutes. So please be mindful of folks' story and how they want to share it, or if they want to share it. That's not your responsibility. And it's not a requirement for them to share with everyone their identities or sexual orientation. That's not necessary. That is their choice if that's something they want to share, but it absolutely can be a barrier to seeking treatment. The lack of awareness, you guys already mentioned that. The levels of confidence and effectiveness in the legal system, you guys already mentioned that as well. I've mentioned this throughout the presentation, but social ownership. Socially, there is this idea around us taking accountability or ownership over someone else's truth, humanness, personhood, and us attributing it to being about us. It is dangerous. It happens every day. It happens all the time. And creating boundaries that separate you and them, or even teaching your client the boundaries between separations of personhood is really important. Not taking on anyone else's issues to be about them is really important. And that we don't have to give people permission to take ownership of us. Do you guys have any questions around this? No? Okay. So the last part of this I want to talk through is the concept of transgenerational trauma. And that stems from generations of folks taking ownership of things, of people's experiences. Well, how does, you identifying as ... impact me? How what are people at church gonna say? Well, I mean, you had that one uncle, but nobody talks to him. How does that impact folks generationally? And what are their ideals around sexuality and identity? Fear of rejection. You guys talked about this a little bit in group 2. I cannot tell you how often this is an encourager of self-harm. This is an encourager of disconnection of relationships. This is an encourager for people to stay living as someone they don't identify as. This is an encourager of things that are not helpful and people moving forward and living freely as who they are. Rejection and people not even learning socially now how to successfully manage rejection creates cycles of harm. Do y'all have any questions about this? Let me make sure I'm not going too quickly. All right. So lack of awareness. A lot of times it's not just about what people don't know, it's that they're not interested in learning anything different either. Ignorance is sometimes a pleasure. And it is absolutely an existence for folks. It can be a choice and an existence. Lack of awareness is not just for the persons trying to understand, but I would also say for the individuals exploring that space of themselves, it is very fragile. One of the things that, or one of the spaces I like to work in with individuals is them figuring out who they are and what they want, and then coming into awareness of who they are and what they want. And that in itself is a journey. So being able to be patient with them through that, even them being in a space of curiosity, not being sure where they are, and that being a whole muffled experience is not out of the norm. Lack of awareness does not necessarily equal ignorance, right? Lack of awareness can also be an exploratory space or phase. The other part of this that I wanted to briefly mention is in the workspace. So a few years ago, I had a client who was afraid, newly transitioned as trans female, was very afraid to go into the workforce out of fear of rejection, out of fear of not being accepted. So one of the things that I did with this particular client was I found a list of workspaces that are LGBTQ friendly. Two of the spaces that I remember and that I absolutely support are Target and Starbucks. Those are LGBTQ affirming workspaces. It is a thing, it does exist. There are lists about LGBTQ affirming workspaces. That matters, you guys. Discrimination, as y'all know, and I'm sure you're very familiar with, discrimination in the workplace does exist fairly frequently. So providing information around safe spaces for this particular population is really important. I want to give another example actually for this. I had another person who decided to work at one of these spaces, but the clientele or the customer base was being very homophobic and used homophobic slurs. So teaching them how to cope, navigate, and have boundaries for themselves is really important, because just because you work in an LGBTQ affirming workspace doesn't mean the consumer base is going to be. So teaching them how to navigate that successfully is really important. Okay. Cultural perspectives on sexuality and gender identity. Do any of you want to share how culturally it impacts how or if people decide to transition or be honest about their sexual preference or identities? Culturally, how does that impact their decision to do so?
I know for me, being African American, can you see me or hear?
What's your name?
Florence.
Hey, Florence,
I can hear you.
I can see you.
I can
you
see
might
her
have to go
too.
down a little bit, Sharde, but I can see you because you got like the outer space background. Hey, Florence.
Oh, okay.
Me and Florence went to Norfolk State together, y'all.
What are your pronouns, Florence?
2019.
Florence, what are your pronouns, please?
I go by she pro.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, like for me personally, I know just culturally, as far as like how I grew up, you know, my brothers are ministers. It was like, you know, they of course they did not they kind of are still on the fence now, but it's like, you know, try to hide can. You know, don't be out loud with it. Talk about it. You know, you're black, you're already a female. Now you're masculine. You're gonna have so much pride. Try to hide it as much as you can. Which of course, you know, not do good as far as, you know, your self-esteem, your who you are, and then also to, like, you know, not fit into the, you know, try to not fit into like little pieces of where people should be and things like that. So I
How
guess that's how I, you know, as girl's perspective.
may I ask, how have you successfully navigated, or have you successfully navigated having that in mind, like knowing that that exists, but also feeling free enough to be who you are and exist in the way that you feel best?
Oh, I would say yes, no,
Okay.
because I still kind of, you know, you gotta, that part of me, like I'm open a little bit, but then it's like, I'm not just gonna come to you, you know, you can make yours ever, but I'm not just gonna come out and tell you. I'm a little bit more open since I don't live in Georgia anymore. Parents are. But still, it's like, you know, I want to be seen. I want to be seen, you know, and I don't want anybody to take that away from me just because of my sexual orientation. I want no one to take all of it from me. And then when I was in the military, it was definitely kind of like hitting the.
Oh, listen, the military is that's a whole nother conversation, because you are absolutely
Yeah.
Around cultural norms and values as it relates to the service, and that being a whole space that creates challenge.
Yeah.
Right, that you're absolutely correct. And then you spoke very candidly about the inflexible standards around the African American community and the religious based community, and those two things working hand in hand, as in there are already standards of inflexibility in the Black community, and it is supported by this idea around religion supports what I think and feel anyway. And it creates this hand in hand that then like comes down as this idea that like a guilt and shame. So I'm so glad to hear that you've explored that whole scene of things, because that is traumatic. Like it blows my mind that we think it's okay for someone to exist their entire life only as what we think they should be, not who they actually are, who they want to be. Thank you so much for that, Florence. We're going to start with another wonderful quote. So I want to attach a question to this. Do any of you think you are authentically who you are? Do you think that you walk in your purpose, intention, and identity that way?
I feel like I could say yes, but I also can say no, because there's always something thrown in my path that tries to throw me off. But I make sure I get back on.
Can I ask what encouraged you to seek that out, to say, I want to live authentically?
It's exhausting to try to please everybody and what they think. And it was not beneficial to me, to where I'm stressed out. I get depressed, you know, so I have to live my truth no matter what anybody else think. I respect your opinions, I respect your thoughts, but it doesn't mean that I have to accept it. I only need to accept myself.
Yes. Yes, I love that. Thank you so much, Carol.
Yeah, for the most part, I think the only one that I'm not 100% authentic around is my mother, because she's almost 80, she's 88, almost 89. And, she lives in the same house, and it's just, I don't need the static because there is no arguing with her. She is one of these people that thinks that she always knows what's best for everybody, no matter what. And I've tried to have the conversation with her, and it was 6 months of hell after a 5-minute conversation. And I'm not willing to put up with that, but I'm also not willing to abandon her in her older years. So we compromise.
I like that word. We're going to talk a whole lot more about that word, compromise. Thank you for sharing. So we're going to talk a little bit about children in the LGBTQ community and educating parents. So one of the youngest folks that I provided gender affirming care for was 10. That is not something that was a few years ago. That was probably the last time I provided care for an individual that young. I no longer, so let me preface this with, I previously would support by writing letters for gender affirming care. And so that is one of the boundaries I put around my practice, is I no longer do it for individuals younger than the age of 18. But that is something I previously did. Also, having an LGBTQ support group was really important. So I had that a part of my practice really up until or a little after the pandemic started. So working with children in this space is really, really, really important, especially because there are a lot more children being a lot more forthcoming and aware of their sexuality and their identity. So these are just some nuances I encourage you all to consider. There are two that I really want to focus on, is being a translator. Often, and we've talked a little bit about it earlier, parents are people too. And they have their own perspectives, their own ideas, morals, values, religious convictions, etc., that impact the way that they view and experience their children. So when you have a child attempting to explore that space of themselves, or they're attempting to pivot from what their parents know or don't know, it is really important that you provide space for them to be authentic with each other without being disrespectful or harmful. What could that mean or look like? If you provide support for the individual, educating them on the process of grief and fear, educating them on the difference between acceptance and tolerance. So there are times where people are going to have to accept that my family, they accept my choices, they accept me, they may disagree with me, but they do accept me and they are willing to support me the best way they know how. Some of that might be compromised or negotiated, but that is something they can work through. There are also times when they are tolerated and it is clear that they are being tolerated, and teaching the individual the importance around setting emotional and psychological boundaries. For parents and for kids, there's another nuance to this. So let's say the parent and the child, you have a parent that's 1000% on board, everything's great, they support their child feels seen and heard, except everyone else in the family does not. Grandparents, that's a no. Aunts and uncles, that's a no. Especially old school grandma and grandpa, that's a no. So we have to teach them how to have acceptance in their household and how to navigate spaces collectively when it is not the ideals of everyone else. The other part of this is creating a space for the child for them to figure things out on their own and not be influenced by what the parents think they should or shouldn't do, feel, or be. Providing a safe space for that. Any questions about any of that? No? Okay. So grief. I didn't really want to focus heavily on that because we talked about it before. Grief is a part of this process, even for the person going through it. I am grieving the life that I'm choosing to leave. Even though I'm choosing to leave it, I'm still grieving the fact that I have to leave it. That I'm choosing something that will cost me some other things, that I'm going to have to sacrifice some things. And that may even include relationships. Teaching parents what grief means, and that it's absolutely normal for them to grieve who they thought their child was, and allowing themselves the opportunity to learn, introduce, get to know this beautiful being in front of them. So self-awareness and self-esteem go hand in hand in self-discovery and actualization. As individuals, we must practice self-awareness to be in touch with ourselves and our needs. Various barriers are created when both social and cultural messages communicate that one person's personhood is not okay, or it's not something that's acceptable. Various barriers are created when both messages communicate that it's less of value or not valuable at all, and creates threats to self-expression and authenticity. So it really creates a space where people feel unsafe just being themselves. Imagine having to go to work and feel like you have to show up in this, and I'm going to specifically speak to the Black experience with this. The people talk about this very often, the dichotomy between who you are as a Black person at home and who you think you have to show up as when you go to work. Not different here. Identities and how we can help them align in the spaces that we take up. Self-expression is necessary. On the totem pole and hierarchy of needs, it is absolutely necessary. It's not optional. So I talked a little bit about this earlier, but not assuming that all therapists or resources are aligned and allied or affirming. So be clear before you send a client somewhere else or you refer them out. These are some resources that I put here. The transgender resource list I have used so many times over. It has affirming care providers listed, and they do a thorough investigation of the provider before they put them on the list. So if none of you have heard of this list, it's very, 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 very helpful. All you do is type it in Google. They have it provided there. It is super helpful. Super, super, super helpful. So here's a question. What are your thoughts about the recent decision to discontinue students from being able to have access to restrooms, locker rooms, changing facilities that match their gender identity, and what are the possible long-term effects?
Hey, this is Latoya. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, Latoya. Okay. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I heard you.
I was going to just say that people in this community already go through a lot on the inside that's not visible to a lot of people. And so not having access to a bathroom or a locker room or even being able to play on sports teams, that's almost putting that pain, that whatever you want to call it, out in the public. And I think it's going to have some very devastating long-term effects on self-esteem, self-worth. I think we're going to see an increased spike in suicide, and it's just unfortunate because it doesn't have to be like that.
Thank you for that.
Okay, I was going to say something along that line. It's Latoya. It definitely would create a lot of tension between individuals in the transgender community, when you're trying to, especially they already have those internal issues trying to adjust to who they are now and how society accepts them. But using the restroom, you go out to restaurants, you go out to the movies, you go out to different social environments, and then you can't use the bathroom, it creates that space of being more isolative because you're not able to go out and enjoy your friends, your family, even if you want to go out by yourself and have Starbucks or go to the movies and you have to use the restroom. Something as simple as that to the average person is a big deal for those in that community because now I have to go, but now I can't go. What do I do? So it creates that internal space of withdrawn, you can't socialize with other people because you don't have access to something as simple as the bathroom. I mean, that creates a lot of introvertedness, things that they're trying to come out of. You're not pushing them back into that space, like not directly in the closet, but now you're kind of pushing them back to be like, okay, you're not welcome in the bathroom. So then what's the point of me being out and socializing? Because you end up having to use the bathroom no matter where you go, Yeah. So it definitely pushes them back into that isolative and withdrawn space. And then people question, well, what's wrong with you? You don't want to come hang out. Well, I would, but if I have to use the bathroom, then what do I do? How can you help me with that? So I just wanted to say it pushes them back into that low-key closet. I don't want to say it like that, but it's kind of like I can't go back out. I can't be out and engage and socialize the way I want to. So it goes from even the adults, even to teenage children or teenage boys or girls, where you're kind of forced to have to not be in a comfortable setting and have access to the things everyone else has.
Yes. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And strategize around what am I going to do in the event? In the event that I got to use the bathroom, what am I going to do? And to be perfectly frank, you guys, again, this is not a new concept. I just think generationally, people are not putting up with it being ignored anymore. So now they're having to have conversations that frankly should have happened years ago. But now it is becoming a real thing, and it is an active conversation that's happening that the world is now trying to be reacted to, when there could have been some proactive steps long before now. None of this is new. None of this is new. And it is challenging because you see the generations that did all the fighting for, protesting before, and them being older now, seeing this generation start and to pick that fight up with some of the same challenges that happened 20, 30 years ago. Some of the same exact challenges. And it is harmful, and it does have long-term effects, because who has exactly what the answer should be? I don't know. But I do understand that it can be harmful for all those involved, because everybody has a perspective on what's right and wrong. And they're convicted in that. I just love this, and I'm gonna just leave that there with y'all. Man is the only creature that refuses to be what he is.
I had a comment.
Yes, go for it.
About the whole bathroom thing.
Yeah.
And everything else. There are those of us out there who literally will walk in or have someone say, okay, so I'm a bathroom buddy. If you're trans or you're non-gender conforming and you don't feel comfortable walking into a public bathroom and you are female identifying, I will whole ass walk in there with you. Mm-hmm. And that's a thing. That's a thing that a lot of people don't recognize if they're not part of the community.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you doing that, because it does provide a level of safety. That's really the role, is to provide a level of safety. So I'm so glad that you are supportive of that space. That's really important. All right, we're going to get into treatment and supports. Treatment options, again, like I've said before, are very limited, you guys. So the resources that you find, keep near and dear to you. I use a lot of the same resources over and over and over because there are not very many of them. And this also applies to locality. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. The resources I would have there compared to here are very different. Los Angeles is a much more progressive space. And it was even when I was younger, you know, even in hindsight, it was when I was younger. So now there's even more resources and space for the LGBTQ community. But again, Virginia is not as progressive as we would like to believe sometimes. And it is actually more conservative, I've found. It's much more conservative. So just being mindful of that. And the other thing that you can consider are online resources. I know that's not ideal for people to do like online support groups and such. However, if they need the resource, they need the resource. I would rather them have something than nothing. So always consider something online. As providers, family members, advocates, allies, supporters, educators, and change makers, we have the power to create systemic change and support the narrative of inclusivity, embracing our value of our differences and educating ourselves on the differences that exist between each other, cultural, sexuality, gender, ethnic identities outside of our own are really, really important. You are a change maker, full stop. What you choose to do with anyone you engage with, whether it's your family member, your child, your spouse, your friend, your coworker, a customer, a patient, a client, you are a change maker. You can provide a safe space for anyone you encounter, and that can be change. So we're going to talk about briefly the value of language. There are a lot of outdated terms that people still use, but that are not appropriate. I want to say it again, that some of these terms are not appropriate. I will give you an example for myself. One of the things that I try to do very often is stay educated because so many things are changing, and navigating through all the changes often is exhausting at times because you want to make sure that you are appropriate and you're considerate and you're respectful. So I'll give you an example. I had one of my interns a couple of years ago. We would co-facilitate we used to give a free LGBTQ support group where people could just show up and we chat. And in that group, after the group, we were just talking and I said, hey, is dyke still a term? And she said, what do you mean? That's not even a thing. And I'm like, well, it is a thing for older lesbian women. They still use the term dyke. But again, my intern was a younger lesbian woman and she said, no, we don't, that's offensive. And I said, okay, can you walk me through this? Because I want to understand generationally that there are differences in language and terms that are appropriate and are not appropriate. And that was one of them. So for older lesbian women, a lot of times the word dyke was used to refer to a more masculine presenting female. Now that term is not okay. So I just choose not to use it at all. Because I would rather be safe than sorry, but I do acknowledge when it is used in the circles that it is appropriate for, that it's okay. So just being aware of the changes in language are really, really, really important. Some of the language also implies pathology. I will give you an example. There used to be a diagnosis for trans folks years ago. It used to be a diagnosis, as in something was wrong with you if you wanted to identify as the opposite sex, and that was diagnosable. So we cannot act like socially and politically the world has not pathologized things outside of what they being the folks in overall power consider the norm. Oh, go ahead, Shani.
It was funny that you, well, not funny, but yeah, it's kind of funny that you said that about the term dyke, because my cousin is who I go to for pretty much any questions that I have. And she's a lesbian, and I always ask her this. So she was telling me, like, yeah, that's a fine word to use. I'm not offended. And I was just like, oh, good. So then I used it, and I had the same incident happen when someone was like, dyke, like, oh my goodness, no, she's just, and I'm like, I wasn't trying to be offensive. So I told my cousin, like, do you even know what you, and I told her, like, do you even know what you are? Why are you giving me? And she was like, that's just the words that we use. She was like, I don't know what the young kids are using. We're not old, but she's like, I don't know what they're using now. But when people call me that, I don't take offense. As opposed to someone I was talking to, they were like, what? Why are you saying that word? Why are you being, derogatory towards me?
And
So
as a contrast to that, I was looking for a pair of pliers, and linesman dikes it's a tool, right? So I said something to my partner about, looking for my dikes, and my other roommate looked and said, well, I'm standing right here. Right? So it all depends. And I think it can be regional too, as to what is acceptable and what isn't. In any language system, there's regional differences in phrases, words, usage, and how they are perceived. It's like if you're up in Massachusetts and someone says bless you or bless your heart, then it means a whole different thing than it does down here. So I think part of that may be regionalized, because my housemate is from New England, but it's a very individual type thing as far as some of that usage goes.
I think sometimes words and affections depend on your relationship with the individual. It is, so when you have that more intimate relationship, same thing. I have friends that I could refer to by that term. I would never refer to someone I did not have a relationship of understanding using that language. And I think, and that's true of many spaces and many different things, I think some of these terms, depending on your relationship with the individual, may be more accepted than not. And I think we just have to be cognizant that when we don't know the person, we tread more lightly and ask and or until they refer to themselves or use the term in that way and kind of give us some permission to use.
Right. I just thought it was funny because I was genuinely looking for the tool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is the other part to that. Be willing to just to apologize. Like, that goes a long way. We're not always going to get it right. Like, no matter how considerate we are, no matter how forthcoming we are about just being intentional and transparent and, respectful, we're going to mess up sometimes. And that's okay. But we need to be accountable for that. And we need to be very transparent about what we're going to do in order to change that. I.e., if someone let's just say I misgender someone. Let's just say that happens. I can be accountable for it. I can be apologetic for it. Okay, how can I fix this? What are your preferred pronouns? And in the event that I mess up again, hey, I'm just letting you know I'm still working it out. If in the event that I use the wrong pronoun, please address me and I will fix it. It is not my intention to disrespect you. Be aware and own your mistakes. It's that simple. It's no need to get offended. No need to get hostile or defensive because they remind you, hey, no, my pronouns are she, her, he, him, they, them. What is there to get offended about? We made a mistake. We can own it and we can apologize and move forward. Let's see. Oops. Okay. So these are some of the outdated language. And I specifically want to refer to transvestite and crossdresser. I took a training recently, maybe like 2 weeks ago. I did a training and they were referring to just updated language. And I thought about, and this was one of the terms that was talked about, that it's outdated and such. And I just thought about how often people still use this language. People still use these kinds of words. It makes me think of pose. Like pose was set 30, 40, and people still speak like this. But I think that comes from lack of education. And sometimes I think it's willful ignorance. I don't know what I don't want to know either. I'm not interested. I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do regardless. So yeah, I mean, I guess you told me, but does it really matter? No. So for us that are here and are interested in doing something different, this is some outdated language that I want to encourage you to be mindful of. And then I have some other words on the next slide as well, but just ways that you can avoid using these terms and replace them with something more appropriate. So these are some appropriate alternatives instead of saying she, her, or yes sir, yes ma'am. So for those of us that are from the South, yes sir, yes ma'am was not even optional, it was a requirement to address an elder as yes sir, yes ma'am. So, and I'll use myself for an example. I moved from Los Angeles when I was 18 years old and started at Tuskegee University. I went and lived in the South for the remainder of my life. Obviously, I'm still in Virginia, but everything from Mississippi to Louisiana, those are heavily conservative spaces where yes ma'am and yes sir is really not an option. That's something you just say. So even in my rhetoric now and in my language now, to my mother, to my child, yes ma'am. Yeah, mommy, hey, I need to, okay, yes ma'am. It's not even a thought for me. So me having to redirect some of that to say, okay, how can I be more inclusive and not refer necessarily to just one gender or another, especially when I'm in the presence of other people that it may impact. So esteemed guest, that person using their name, that is what I challenge people to refer to if you are unsure, if you struggle with changing the pronouns, because I will say this to you guys. Sometimes what happens, and this is not even an intentional thing, if you see one thing and your mind tells you what I see is one thing and what you're asking me to say is something else, there is a disconnect at times that says, okay, well, what my mind says is to say she, her, because that's what I think I see. But what you're asking me to say is he, him. So even though I might intentionally want to say he, him, I still might say she, her. Again, just to be accountable. Just to be accountable. These are some other words you can use. Everyone, siblings, students, friends, colleagues, that person, esteemed guest, use their name. Everyone has a name for a reason. Do y'all have any questions about this?
If I can offer a comment, I didn't catch if you were talking about the use of those terms in particular spaces, but if you have someone who is in certain types, and I will say certain types of kink adjacent relationships, sir and ma'am can be considered honorifics and they're reserved use for certain people.
Yeah.
So and it can be very specific to one person. That's the only person that gets to call me that kind of thing.
Okay.
So as long as we are aware of that more than anything else, and if you do have someone that you're working with that is talking about a partner or someone in that type of relationship, you know, it's okay to say, you know, do you have an honorific for that person, so that if you're referring to them, that I can know who you're talking about.
Absolutely. And that's you're absolutely correct. So just being mindful of your spaces. Just being mindful of your spaces. Absolutely.
I had a question.
Yes.
Somewhat unrelated. I haven't been able to get a good answer on this.
Okay.
I want to like fully understand the difference between gay, lesbian, and queer. No one's been able to really me a good definition of what to identify as queer means?
This is the way that I approach it and I define it. Lesbian is a female who is sexually attracted to and interested in females. As in, there can be a trans female and a trans female that is still considered, they're still considered lesbians. Does everybody understand that? Because I know that's also a whole nother mind-blowing concept people struggle with, is like, if they're trans and they say, okay, well, I have a trans female and a trans female, are they considered lesbians? Most of the time they consider themselves lesbians. So the other part, you said lesbian, gay refers to male and male, same with trans male and trans male, if that's appropriate. Queer is almost the umbrella that can apply to a lot of variances. Because I have folks that will identify as queer that will also identify as lesbian and use it alternatively. So I'm going to also say it depends on the person. It depends on the person. A lot of this language, as we've kind of discussed before, is used in nuances depending on the place, the cultural context, depending on the generation. Because I will also say generationally, a lot of older folks in the LGBTQ community don't use the word queer. They specifically refer to gay, lesbian, trans, etc. The word queer has been used a lot more formally in newer generations, not in older generations. So it is more specifically defined earlier than it is now. Queer is almost the umbrella, is what I say. Queer is the umbrella. So anyone can fall under queer, but not everyone falls under gay or lesbian. And now I will also say gay is one of those words that has been used for varying persons. So gay in I will say even generations before has been used to apply to individuals who identify as lesbian, individuals who may now identify as queer. So that has been one of those all-encompassing words as well, versus lesbian has traditionally been more specific versus gay and queer, if that was helpful at all.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding has been kind of how you approached it being kind of like an overarching like umbrella term that encompasses a lot of other terms. I've just never wanted to use it in the wrong meaning or context or whatever.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I will say I don't generally use the word queer unless this person specifically uses the word queer. I just inquire about what their specific nuance, identity, preferences, and then we go from there. Because again, in my experience, I don't have a whole lot of folks that use the word queer. They have a specific identity that they're wanting me to respect and acknowledge. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of go in that direction. But yeah, some of them overlap. Especially generationally, let me say that. Generationally, as we know it, gay used to apply to just about everyone, correct? Mm-hmm. But that's not necessarily the case as much anymore as it is now, where queer is almost the replacement word for that.
Yeah.
But again, it depends on the person.
Yeah.
I see a hand. Go for it.
The other thing that I noticed, and I don't know if you touched on it or not, is sapio and pan.
Mm-hmm.
So sapiosexual is basically, it's an intellectual attraction first before it's any type of physical relationship or physical attraction. Physical attraction is based on the intellectual. Mm-hmm. Whereas pan is more just anybody. It doesn't really matter, because for a long time, lesbian, gay, queer was all based upon gender identity. But what happens if you don't identify as a male? What happens if you don't identify as a female? So pan gives that if you are gender neutral, then that's inclusive in pansexual. So just because it's not one of the ones that you see more than anything else, pansexual and sapiosexual are becoming more and more commonplace to be heard.
Thank you for that. No, I had
You're
not.
welcome.
I had not discussed that at all. So this is what I'll say. That to me is more advanced when you're talking about sexuality and identity, simply because this particular presentation is focused on just 101 information, but you're absolutely right. That is something that exists very often, more now than I think people have discussed previously. Excuse
It
me.
seems to be very prevalent in the poly and in the poly communities more than anything else. Sorry, I will use E&M instead of poly. Ethical non-monogamy. It seems to be more prevalent in those communities.
Yes.
In many cases.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay. And we kind of talked about this binary assumptive language, and that's what instead of just using boys and girls or men and women's facilities, things like that. And it doesn't mean you cannot use those terms. So one of the other conversations that had been happening that kind of blew up on social media not too long ago was this idea around not that females shouldn't be able to be identified as women. Everyone should be able to identify as women. And you can't say childbearing. What if it's a trans woman and she can't bear a child? This is what I will say. Language is not supposed to be exclusive. It is supposed to be inclusive. So that is to not take away the rights from childbearing women or women who are born biologically women. That's also not to take away the rights for women who identify as women, who are trans female, or who are not biologically born as female. The idea is that everyone can be heard, seen, respected, and acknowledged without taking away the rights of someone else. So that in itself is like a whole conversation now, which I'm sure there will be some things coming out of that soon. So building rapport is one of the most basic and influential interventions you can use. Having an open space for personhood to evolve and show itself. It's necessary for us to be able to provide space for people to be themselves and keep an open and curious mind to that. We don't have to define people. Let people define themselves. So when they come into your office or in your space, or you all are sharing interactions with each other, allow for curiosity and allow for you to just evolve in the story and be aware of their story. Changing the narrative. So a lot of this starts with not assuming. So often we assume based on what we see. So when someone is approaching you, we immediately start to process who you are based on what we see first. Have we heard anything about you prior to you being here? What do I see in front of me? What am I making up about this? How does this impact what I'm going to say to you and how I'm going to treat you? So we have to change the narrative to allow space for us to get to know them based on what they tell us and what our experience is versus what we assume. Building rapport, like I said, is one of those. Allowing yourself to build a relationship with this individual and not assuming you know who they are based on what their chart read, what you read in their chart, or what someone told you, or what you think you see. Ask questions, be curious. I'm going to say it 1,000,000 times. Be curious. Reflective listening. More often than not, I think we listen with the intention to hear what we want to hear and get out of it what we want to get out of it. So reflective listening simply means I am listening to you and I'm going to reflect back to you what I hear. So I want to make sure I heard you correctly. What I heard you say was XYZ. Is that correct? Did you mean when you said? I want to make sure I'm understanding. Is this what you meant for me to take away? You can ask for clarity. Reflective listening means to listen and reflect back what you heard. That gives them the opportunity to correct you and for you to take away what the intended outcome was. Does anybody have any questions about that? No? Okay. Assessing your role and personhood to identify barriers and limitations. We all have biases, all of us. We all have assumptions in us dealing and interacting with people. We all have barriers to how we interact, whether that be something that happened to us that was traumatic. So we go into working with other people with that assumption and with that bias, because that also is still considered a bias. Let's say I am someone who has been misgendered, and I go into conversation with other trans folks with the assumption that they've struggled with being misgendered as well. That's not a thing. We have to give people the opportunity to educate us on their experience, not assume that that's their experience because it was ours. Any questions about any of that? Oh, I'm sorry. I just saw a question about using Mr. and Miss. So Mr. and Miss is another one of those things like sir and ma'am. And what I would say is I just use first and last names if at all possible, or I can say, hey, how would you like you refer to me? Or hey, I use first names. Mr. and Miss still refers to a sex unless that's something they identify. So I'll give you another example. Let's say this person has identified as she, her, then it would be okay to use Miss because Miss aligns with she, her. Or this person has identified as identified their pronouns as he, him. Mr. would align with he, him. But let's say they identify as they, them. Mr. or Miss does not apply to either. Does that answer your question? Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, 100%.
It does. I've gotten it more from professionals than clients. Like clients, I'm easy breezy and I make it work, but I have had so many comments about using Miss and Mr. And I've explained that the whole purpose is what you're saying. It's really about giving respect.
Yes.
But I have had just, peers that have just like crucified me for doing it. And it's kind of something you have to get used to doing. So if you're used to doing it, you have to undo it.
Yes.
Then you have to remember that it's okay with some people and not others. So it's never with the client. It's more with other professionals that I work with that just have this really strong response to it, which is very interesting to me.
Strong response to wanting to use Mr. and Mrs.?
Wanting me not to. I received an email. So for example, I received an email from a staff that said, my marriage has nothing to do with my job. Please, please, please stop calling me Miss such and such. So I guess if I had a relationship with the person, it wouldn't have really thrown me off, but I was brand new to the agency and I got that probably in the first 3 weeks. And that was probably the second conversation I had ever had with that individual. So I was asking from a perspective of like, adult to adult type of thing, with a client or a youth. I mean, I do whatever is comfortable for them.
Yeah. I'm going to say this. I think generationally, it has just gotten to a place where people are not even allowing space to make mistakes. People are not even allowing space for growth and conversation. People making mistakes turns into a crucifixion, if you will. And because people are so non-confrontational and they don't want to deal with conflict, it becomes social media and letters and all of these very aggressive, passive aggressive rather, routes instead of educating and supporting people and understanding their perspective. I will also say this, Mr. and Miss, just like some of these other language generationally, was something you said out of respect. So now it has transitioned because of all of the nuances that society is now willing to recognize around gender and identity. So there are some changes there. But I think it's just because things are evolving so rapidly that there are changes happening that we are not even aware of. And we say normally what we just usually say, and it's not with the intention of disrespect.
I appreciate that insight. Because like I said, it came, and I explained through the email, it came from a place of just respect. And so you either do things that help or hinder a relationship. After that, like, we're not relationship building.
Yeah.
You flipped out on me on something so small. So I think one of the things you've said more than once on here is that we have to leave space for people to make mistakes, and not to go way left with it when someone makes a mistake. Because if you watch me long enough, 5 minutes, I'm about making probably another 2 or 3. So they're coming. And I think if clients see us interacting like that, you're not going to tell me that a client can't pick up that you are rude to your coworkers, which means at some point you're going to be rude to some client.
Yeah.
That doesn't stay in a vacuum.
No, it doesn't. And why do we assume the worst of people? What happened to giving grace? What happened to just saying, you know what? Hey, I know you're new here. I just wanted to let you know that I don't go by this. I prefer to go by this. I know that it sounds like that may be something you use just in passing, as just, interacting or addressing folks. But that's not something I prefer. It's something as simple as that. But this environment seems to be very fragile. Very, very, very fragile. And I think it's just generationally, people have been traumatized by having to be what everyone else said they should be. So now people are so protective of, you're not gonna make me into who you want me to be. I want to be who I want to be. And they are willing to defend that at every cost. And I think sometimes the anger and frustration gets misdirected, if that makes sense. So I do hope that we can start to have more kind, curious, and graceful conversations with each other, because a lot more can come out of that than being defensive and punishing people for just being themselves and really not intentionally trying to be hurtful. So I'm so glad that you said that, because we are living in a very fragile environment right now. People are fragile, families are fragile, finances are fragile. Everything is stressful and exhausting, and people are just so tired of being what everybody else told them to be, and they're protecting their identities at all costs, you guys, at all costs. Everything from cussing people out on the internet to, you see, every time you turn around, you're hearing about a Twitter fight, or somebody fighting on social media, or you're not going to tell me about who I am. It is constant. And I think it's just, people want to be recognized for who they identify as. Simple as that. They want to live freely in that, and I can respect that. But we also have to provide grace. That goes hand in hand. It just does. I thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Florence. Yeah, that is literally Mr. and Mrs. and yes, sir, yes, ma'am. That's one of those ones. That is definitely one of those ones. We talked a lot about self-expression and self-awareness, so I'm going to skip this one. And I'm going to go to some resources, because we are wrapping up and we are right on time. Come on, time. I have a lot of resources for you guys here at the end of this presentation. So when it is posted, it's a ton of resources. Of course, ending with James Baldwin, love takes off all the masks we fear we cannot live without, and no, we cannot live within. Love, love, love this quote. Any questions, comments, reactions, concerns? These are on my Facebook handles here and my website. You guys can write me, contact me with any additional questions. And then I do have some of the things that I've produced here, if you all are interested in those, but I definitely want to hear from you. Any feedback about how you felt about today, any additional questions you guys have, we can process those now. We have about 9 minutes.
I think this was
selling on
amazing.
Amazon.
I'm
I know
sorry.
me and Carol was ready. I was like, this was amazing. And Carol's talking about Amazon.
No TikTok?
Yes,
books.
ma'am. I have TikTok. I dance on TikTok. That's what I
It's
do.
not there.
The barefoot, hold on. The barefoot
not-
there. On
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
I'm
Not on your list.
oh, 1 second. Give me 2 seconds. I'm sorry. Oh, the barefoot therapist, the first one is for TikTok.
Okay.
And I think it has 2 T's, if I'm not mistaken. Give me 2 seconds. Yes, the barefoot therapist with 2 T's at the end.
Well, don't be surprised when you see mine. It's Mistress Rhiannon.
Okay. Those are all my handles. Any comments, concerns, questions, feedback? I would love to hear what y'all thought about today, how you felt about the information. Go for it. I'm going to mute myself.
I think I want to thank you for creating a safe space for people to take the risk to share to the level that people did, and thank the people that did take that risk to share. I think that's wonderful. And I really appreciate the last few comments about giving grace. I think that's something, you know, I alluded to, I encounter sometimes. And I think we know when someone is trying to do the right thing or speak the right language and just don't have the tools or don't have the ability. And we're creating a culture where we won't grow because people won't take the risk to try to seek to understand or be vulnerable and say, you know, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. And I think we know when someone intentionally is being a jerk versus when someone is struggling with maybe the most appropriate way to approach or use the language or handle a topic that maybe they just don't know. And so I really appreciate the whole giving grace aspect. And I think we get told, well, it's not my job to educate you. And I'm like, but yet it is. It is my job to point you towards the education. Maybe not necessarily have you do all the, it's not my job to give you all the legwork, but it is my job as a human being to point you in spaces and directions that allow growth and inspire you to grow, and not reinforce the divide. So I appreciate you having those conversations in this space and allowing it to be that.
Thank you so much. You are absolutely correct. We do have to teach people how to treat us. It's not their job to teach us, for us to assume that they want to be treated like us. So to some degree, you're absolutely, it is our job to teach them how to treat us. And we have to give grace for that. It is coming to the point where people are so fearful because of the defensiveness. People just don't want to interact or say anything at all. They just would rather not. If I can't safely make mistakes, I don't even want to try, because it's becoming a slippery slope where if I say one wrong thing, all hell breaks loose. And now I'm the worst person in the world. Now I'm getting cussed out. Now I'm getting talked about. Now, I'm not appropriate. Now I'm disrespectful when I was just trying to do my best. And we have to give credit for people just trying to do their best. So thank you so much for that. Go ahead. I know Emily and then Dr. Darton Robinson.
I was going to just say, I personally have been really just disheartened with how the political landscape has been shifting, and have just been genuinely upset about everything and just very sad and almost overwhelmed, because it doesn't seem like a fight that can be won in the current climate. I don't know what happened there. Sorry.
Okay.
But I wanted to just say thank you for having this kind of training and bringing together mental health professionals who have the compassion and the fight for this. It's very encouraging.
Thank you. I'm so glad. That's what it requires, y'all. They are taking away women's reproductive. They are policing women's reproductive rights. We don't know what's to come. But I do know we cannot stop education. We have to continue educating ourselves. We have to continue speaking up and speaking out. We have to continue to fight for ourselves, because if we don't, we are doing it and we still see what's happening. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. If we are to the point now where women have to question whether or not they can go get an abortion or not, that is the landscape. That is the landscape. So just keeping those things in mind, and it is demoralizing. It is so humiliating and exhausting to think of what our children are being raised in and what they have to look forward to. So you're absolutely correct. And thank you for being here today.
I definitely just want to add that I appreciated the training as well. The other thing that came to mind while we were just talking is, you know, from the perspective of, I know there's a lot of different trainings pertaining to how we treat clients. One of the things that I've become more fascinated with is how we treat one another as professionals. And I have actually talked with and held, you know, conversations with other folk about that, because, you know, we know what we're supposed to do and what the robot does with the client, but sometimes we don't even know how to get along and be inclusive of people that we work with. And that's just coming from a space of my personal experience with employers and, you know, people that are on the same, you know, we're peers, right? And you'll treat me like crap, but you perform with the client. And I think there needs to be some definitely a lot of onus placed on that, because you're not being truly authentic if you're fake with a client and you're not right with your coworkers. So that's another area that I would just add that's incredibly important for us to kind of consider, especially even considering this particular topic. You know how to interact with the client, but how do you really interact with a teammate if this is the situation? So I would just add that as a caveat and something definitely to think about. But I have appreciated the training, it was great.
Thank you. That's a whole training space, for the record. I always say in our work, it's never the clients, it's always the staff, always. But I think that's because we are in the professional of caring for and taking care of other people. And how often do we invest that time in taking care of ourselves? And how often do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to create connections outside of our work? And do we do the work as individuals to be better and bigger and grow, and not just relate that to being a provider? Those are two different things. Those are part of the roles that we are in, but that is not our identity as individual human beings. And we still have to do that work before we can be effective in the other work.
Very true. If we surveyed from our clients how they see us interacting with our teammates, what would that look like? It's worth considering.
Compassion does not, compassion or lack thereof doesn't just stop with your coworkers. And I'm going to say this, the people may think that they're the best with their clients, but there is a reading that will happen with your coworkers and your teammates, because it does not just stop. It's not an island. It absolutely crosses over. So being mindful of like how we treat the people that we work with that support us in the work that we do also carries over to the people that we service. It just does. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, it's you, Dr. Robinson, do you prefer Darden or Darden Robinson?
Since I have that hyphenated name, as long as the doctor is there, just because I have people that purposely refuse to recognize it, that's the only thing I care about. I go by Dr. Mary, Dr. Darden, or Dr. Robinson, any of them.
Yeah, I don't even use mine because they say it's a PhD and it doesn't count. But oh, believe me, yeah, no, it's bad. But Sharde, thank you so very much, because this has been great, and people have forgotten how to treat others in the workplace. And I do think that we need to be very conscious of that. We need to be very conscious and cognizant, not only of what we do to and for others, but what we do to and for ourselves, because we stress ourselves out. I think in a lot of ways we are our own worst enemies, and we need to not just be kind to everybody else, but we need to be kind to ourselves too. So thank you all so much.
Thank you guys. And we're wrapping up and we're going to close out. I just want to say again, it has been my privilege today. I absolutely love to train and educate. And because I learn from you in these kinds of spaces, I learn so much and I get so much from this kind of interaction. So I really appreciate y'all showing up and showing out today. And I look forward to interacting with y'all in the future. So take care. Have the beautiful rest of your day.